Thank you very much. Am I on? I am on. All right. Thank you very much. I am so pleased to be here today, part of the World Bank Group. I work in the World Bank Institute, as has been introduced, and we very much specialize in capacity development of the bank's partners and clients. I thank you for welcoming me and for allowing me to share with you some insights on social accountability based on quite an amount of practice over the years, and obviously an understanding of the literature and so on. Social accountability really needs to be seen as a way to improve the accountability of governments in addition to existing government accountability systems. It's not entirely new, but it's an extension of those approaches to improving accountability that need reinforcing. There have been several or various ways to do that through the rules and regulations, administrative procedures and audits, and so on. Governments have embraced market principles, so-called new public management, to draw from the private sector to improve the way it does its business. And government also has independent pro-accountability agencies, such as the anti-corruption bureaus, the ombudsman functions, the commissions, such as the human rights commissions, supreme audit institutions, and others. And all of these are there to strengthen the accountability of government to its people. Social accountability takes us a step further in the sense that it relies on the agency of non-state actors, citizens, the media, think tanks, community-based organizations, and others. These can initiate upward accountability efforts to ensure that basic services are delivering as designed, to ensure that budgets that have been created are directed to intended purposes and are fulfilling policy, to ensure that public policy itself is delivering on its promise to improve the lives of citizens. It can also be initiated by state actors. There are governments that have initiated social accountability initiatives. The Porto Alegre grand experiment in participatory budgeting in Rio Grande do Sul in Brazil is very much initiated by local government. In Nepal, where I've worked a lot, we have the government of Nepal initiating social audit in education and in health. However, there is no social accountability until there is citizen engagement. There has to be citizen engagement for that to be called social accountability. In other words, it is accountability that is created or fostered through the agency of societal actors. Without that, we do not have it. And if you like to sort of paint a vision of accountable governance, I would like to see governments all over the world embrace social accountability as a business model that says if donors are going to, or even investors are going to work in the country, they need to understand that this particular government relies on the monitoring and input of its citizens for services and budgets, expenditure and so forth to be accountable. It needn't be only through the pressure of societal actors. Governments themselves can actually embrace it as a good business model. And it tells you I'm talking more than I am, so I think I have probably... So all of that to say that the way we define social accountability is precisely that. It is accountability through the agency of societal actors. There are several kinds of, or several forms of accountability. As I said earlier, government itself has its own internal accountability mechanisms, captured in administrative procedures, but importantly, institutions of checks and balance. Parliaments, as I said already, Ombudsman, Anti-Corruption Bureau, and so forth. These are called horizontal mechanisms. In other words, it's sideways. Government institutions making each other accountable. Then you have I just described, social accountability, which is called vertical accountability. Societal actors seeking accountability of public institutions from below. There is a much more debated one, which is called diagonal accountability. And put simply, diagonal accountability recognizes that actually citizens can participate in the work of horizontal government accountability institutions. They can insert themselves in the way Parliament enforces accountability of government. They can insert themselves in the way the Anti-Corruption Bureau seeks accountability of public institutions. They can access information that comes from audit. When the Supreme Audit Institution is working on audit data, audit information, citizens can get that information and work collaboratively with the Supreme Audit Institution to enforce accountability of the findings of the audit report and so forth. And that is, there is an emerging concern that social accountability, in addition to just being pressure from below, should also contribute to the quality and effectiveness of internal government accountability systems. I could have talked about political accountability as well, which is another type of accountability, but probably we can leave that to question and answer. This diagram here is very important. Here we argue that accountability principally depends on two critical features. The first is transparency and disclosure by government. Without this, you might as well not have citizen engagement. There needs to be access to government information, government data, and government processes for citizens to participate. So transparency is very important. In the World Bank Institute, we use an instrument or program called Boost. Don't ask me what it means, it just sounds nice, Boost. And what Boost does is that it gets into public expenditure data, it visualizes that data, animates it, and demystifies it. If you like, it decodes the data so that regular, ordinary people can access that data and actually follow the money. We also have a program under our Media for Accountability program, where we take journalists into the black box of public financial management data and enable journalists to better understand that government data, to open it up using various methods and create easier access. So transparency is very important. It can be done by government itself voluntarily opening up. As you hear these days, the whole movement around open data is trying to do that. Open Data Kenya, Open Data Moldova, and others. It can also be done by citizens pushing for access to information. So government can enact access to information laws which create more transparency, and citizens can advocate the existence of access to information laws. I'll speak to that later. The second pillar is participation. Once transparency happens, there is the so what question. So what when the data is opened? when the data is opened, there needs to be citizen use of that data, as I said, if it's journalists, to follow the money. How is public spending going? And for journalists especially, to create channels for citizens to interact with public officials or elected officials to ask tough questions about public spending. What's probably different with this diagram here from other ways in which we have talked about accountability before is that usually we've argued that accountability of government comes from openness and participation, as I've just said. But remember that the goal of all this is for government to be effective, to perform better. That means the government has to have the ability to identify problems, whether there are bottlenecks in the service delivery, discrimination of girls in education, problems with the power grid, and many more problems. That government needs to see that citizens and their organizations exist, not just to put pressure on it to be accountable, but to collaborate to find solutions to governance challenges and governance problems. And so that last pillar there is very important. We would call that collaborative governance. And especially in the context of transition, this is very important because there are many schools of thought. There are people who argue that when there are transitions, say countries are coming from conflict or dictatorships and so forth, there's a sense in which institutions are fragile. And social accountability and pressures from citizens, as much as they are critical to accountability, they can also be disruptive because institutions are too weak. So we need to balance that accountability with a sense that societal actors actually want to make government work. They want to collaborate to find solutions. And the governments need to be agile, flexible enough to understand that the value added of civil society and citizens is their autonomy and not interfere with that. If they lose their autonomy, they lose their effectiveness. And that autonomy allows them to put pressure on the system. However, there also needs to be a flexibility to understand that they put pressure, but they're also partners who collaborate in the delivery of services and in finding solutions. And so that agility in new governments is very important to understand the role of societal actors. This here is a depiction of what you would call oversight by non-state actors. There is an interplay of roles. There are different entry points. Citizens choose where to enter into the broad scheme of governance priorities. Sometimes they participate in the hearings of public accounts committees of parliament to reinforce the work of public accounts committee as accountability institutions. I think I need my watch because I've got a feeling I'm running slow. It's right here. How much time do I have? Okay, I'm sorry about the disruption. Or they can choose to analyze the government budget independently. I'll talk to that later on. And independent budget analysis has increasingly become an important part of how social accountability is conducted because it offers an alternative citizen perspective on the budget, interrogating the budget on issues of equity, how the budget is going to be distributed, how the budget is going to affect especially marginalized groups, girls, women, boys, youth, disabled people, and so on. Citizens can also participate, as I mentioned earlier, in the audit system, chasing up audit reports and their findings and ensuring that they are implemented. So there's a range of entry points and priorities that together form what you might call kind of multi-stakeholder participation, multi-stakeholder oversight of the way public affairs are conducted. The next slide is a very important slide. It comes out of the World Bank's 2004 World Development Report on making services work for the poor. I want to talk to this one actually very, very briefly. Long ago, the only recourse that citizens had when things were not working well was that they would through advocacy, put pressure on policymakers, government officials. Services are not working. We want you to make things work. We don't have roads in our area. We don't have water, and we don't have extension services. And then the government officials from there would go down and put pressure on service providers to improve their services. Social accountability is what's happening here. So-called client power. When the clients themselves or customers themselves, citizens, are empowered to directly, I like to use the word interrogate, so forgive me if I use it repetitively, directly challenge and interrogate service providers on the quality of the services that they are providing. So between the state and service providers is what you might call a compact. They have a contract with service providers to deliver. And when citizens are able to appeal to policymakers, you can call that voice. They're exercising voice to get policymakers to do something. And ultimately, accountability comes from all of the above. I want to highlight something that's starting to happen in that compact area there. Because between government and service providers are many contracts. And those contracts need to be increasingly opened up. If you think of where government is losing money today, a lot of it is lost right there. The public procurement system is vulnerable to abuse and to corruption. And we in the World Bank Institute have initiated an important work around open contracting to ensure that contracts are open to the public. And this is especially important in extractive industries, with countries that are finding new oil and gas. If the contracts are not open to the public and they are done through deals in the dark corridors of government, I was watching a program on CNN, I don't know how many of you saw it, on Angola, which is describing this very problem. What happens is that with oil, the bosses are no longer the citizens. The bosses are the multinational companies that are coming to exploit the oil. And so the accountability is actually distorted. Governments feel accountable to foreigners, and they can stuff the citizens. So it's very important that whatever contracts are taking place are monitored, are scrutinized by citizens, whether to mine or indeed to deliver services. If a contract is given on education, whether to deliver books, to purchase books and to deliver, it needs to be opened. And then the whole procurement system needs to be subject to citizen scrutiny. So you've got the monitoring of services through client power. You also have a form of client power in the monitoring of public procurement, so that those who are getting service delivery contracts are accountable. And the totality of all that will likely add to much greater accountability. This diagram also shows that the government needs to create an enabling environment through good policies and good procedures that allow citizens and their organizations to do these sorts of things. And there needs to be, 3 minutes, there needs to be not just an enabling environment, but the government needs capacity. When you have citizens monitoring services, or indeed monitoring public procurement, when you have got grievance mechanisms or systems which allow citizens to complain what's going wrong, you need government to have the ability to respond to that. So some of the things that we do are to do with helping governments to create the business processes that enable them to respond to citizen grievances and to citizen issues. Let me move on, because this is an interesting slide which goes back many years. It simply shows, if you think of the budget cycle as the formulation of the budget, the execution of the budget, and the audit. We add a layer there because there's just the importance of tracking public spending. These are the entry points, if you like, into public financial management by citizens to make the government accountable. And there are several examples of note. One that I like, which is very old, is done by the Development Initiatives for Social and Human Action in India, which works among tribals in India. And essentially, it's an independent budget analysis. They go in and analyze the budget to see how much resources are being designated to tribals, and are those resources actually speaking to the conditions of tribals. They also take the same budget and demystify it and make it accessible to regular poor people so that they can understand how the budget is being conducted for them. And the Philippines, if you look at the last one on monitoring services, there's something that's called Check My School, which we're also supporting, and I brought some literature that will explain that. Check My School is very much it's a combination of a web portal and social mobilization. The web portal allows Philippine citizens to get access to their schools, to know what's happening there with textbooks, with facilities, with the conduct of teachers, with performance on exams, and they provide direct feedback to the Ministry of Education on the quality of education. But there are also what are called intermediaries, intermediators, if you like, who connect citizens to the public education system, especially those who can't access the websites, and help them to understand what's happening to their schools, elicit their feedback and capture that feedback and channel it to the Ministry of Education. The challenge there for the Ministry of Education is how they increase their ability to respond to the numerous issues and complaints that are raised by citizens. I won't go into this slide in detail, but it's simply illustrating that social accountability, put simply, has got 4 basic building blocks. You want the transparency in there, and once the transparency happens, citizens can use information that's made available by government to define their issues, to define their agendas, and to negotiate with governments. And government has responsibility on the basis of the representations of the citizens to respond. And when they respond, citizens have to monitor what is going on with that response. It's simple, but hopefully not simplistic, because sometimes we like to make these things very complicated. And I'll not go into this, that slide is very complicated. One of the things that I'm depicting here is that the World Bank is supporting social accountability across 3 layers in the region. At the strategic level, we're trying to help at the national strategies of the bank, how we can inform those strategies with social accountability priorities. And then there is a capacity building layer where we are helping to strengthen capacities of governments and also of citizens. And one feature of that is I'm sure it will come up in the program, Answer Arab World, the affiliated network for social accountability, which is housed here. The hub is at Caire International, Egypt, and it has members in across the Arab countries. Basically, it's a civil society capacity strengthening network, which also integrates private sector actors. And it's building a program of social accountability which has 4 pillars. It's pushing for freedom of association, access to information, budget transparency, and improving service delivery through social monitoring. And then, of course, we're supporting at operational level. There are examples that I had set aside here at the end. Some examples of social accountability in the Middle East, in Morocco, participatory monitoring and evaluation of education, and how parents and teachers associations are collaborating with citizens to create change in the education system. And in Egypt, we support a community scorecard. Am I done? Community scorecard to improve the quality of education, and so on and so forth. Yemen has a very interesting water Water User Association program, which uses community-based management to capture citizen feedback on the quality of water services in SANA and provide feedback to improve it. So here are some quick recommendations at the end of all this. First of all, I'm recommending that there be in the region a mutual recognition that citizens and citizen organizations have an important role to play in ensuring more accountability of government, in collaborating and supporting governance reforms, but also in collaborating to find solutions to governance challenges. Governments need to create enabling conditions for this to happen, including greater openness, transparency and disclosure, but also access to data. Second, government needs to create enabling conditions for citizen engagement, for right information, freedom of association, of assembly, of voice and freedoms of the media, mechanisms for negotiation with citizens, and laws that enable CSOs to access resources. And finally, continued growth of CSO capacity is urgent in the region. Capacity in their ability to work, to construct their own agendas, to engage governments directly or in coalition, capacity to collaborate to tackle challenges, and also to build their own internal accountability systems. Oh, I'm sorry, it's dark, you can't see that. But at least I've read it. So I've jumped a lot of slides. I'm so grateful for this opportunity, and I look forward to question time when we can discuss the details. Thank you very much.